the Johnny Rocket Launchpad. And now, here's Johnny.
Hey, it's Johnny Rocket here at the Johnny Rocket Launchpad, launching ideas in your direction, the Northwest only rock and roll libertarian radio show. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Kurt Nelson.
Badow!
My voice of reason, the beautiful Heather Nixon.
Hello.
And it's my Heather Nixon, and we're here with Principal Attorney Timothy Sandefur from the Pacific Legal Foundation.
Woo! Thanks again for being with us, Tim. This is amazing. It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Thanks. It's fun.
All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start off our third segment with Rocket Fire. How Rocket Fire works is we're going to ask you a series of 10 questions. You can answer these questions within 30 to 60 seconds. They're political, most likely. Are you ready to play Rocket Fire?
Yes.
Rocket Fire! Rocket Fire! Question 1. Should the government be concerned with environmental issues?
Concerned, yes. Nuisance laws exist, for example, to prevent you from polluting your neighbor's land. But I am really hesitant to allow the government to impose permit requirements and to regulate everything you do with your property in order to protect the environment.
Right on. Should the government increase its presence within the UN?
I don't really know how you would define increase its presence, but I would say that I think the UN ought to be rendered obsolete by the creation of a new organization open only to democracies.
Okay.
Which the United States would then spearhead.
Right on. Do you think the Tea Party and the Liberty Movement will continue to grow, or do you think establishments will hold the reins in?
Both.
Okay.
Well, I think the Tea Party movement will continue to cause trouble for the establishment, and that the establishment will try to render the Tea Party and other similar movements neutral by adopting whatever it can from their ideas. And that's a good thing. That's the way it ought to work.
Why has the term liberal been hijacked by the left progressive?
Well, that is a long story, actually, and basically the reason is that libertarians are a variety of liberal, not of conservative, as a lot of people think. Libertarians are market liberals. They're people who believe in the liberal goal of freeing individuals, but they think that things like the welfare state and government regulation are the wrong way to go about that.
Right.
They think that free markets are the ways to liberate individuals. That's as opposed to conservatives who don't care about liberating individuals at all. They care about stable, unchanging societies. And so there's a lot of confusion in this realm because people like Ronald Reagan are considered conservative, even though a lot of the things that they argued for are actually libertarian. And so just for historical reasons, it gets a little confusing.
Right on. Do you think anarchy is a viable school of philosophical thought?
Viable? No. But I think that anarchists make a lot of really good points.
Right on. I agree with you on that one. Would you consider yourself a classical liberal?
Yes.
Right on. Is there such thing as equality of opportunity?
Oh, well, I mean, yes, in the sense that you can have a society where everybody has the opportunity to, for example, learn the skills necessary to become a doctor, for example. But of course, if you mean by that everybody has equal access, equal ability to afford medical school, then of course not. Nobody's ever going to be equal, and nobody ever has been equal. And we shouldn't try to make them equal, because the effort to do so causes all sorts of problems with society and violates individual freedom.
I agree. How do you feel about President Obama's approval rating moving to the 48th percentile?
Is that high or low for him?
That's high, actually.
Yeah.
It was like 40 or 38.
I don't know. Like I said, I care so little about politics because politics is so rarely about principle. I would be perfectly fine with President Obama if he obeyed the law.
Right. I'm with you on that one. Question 9. Should we have open borders?
No, but we should have very permeable borders. They should not. There are 3 valid reasons for limiting immigration into a country. One is the control of communicable diseases. Another is the danger of crime and terrorism. And the third is to ensure that the people who come to the United States understand and respect our political and constitutional institutions. Unfortunately, a lot of Americans don't understand or respect our political and constitutional institutions. So it's really hard to draw the line there.
Mhm.
I think it should be very easy to become an American citizen.
I agree.
You should just be able, as long as you respect the country and aren't here to overthrow it or blow it up or kill people, then you should be able to become an American. And it's really a horrible thing that a lot of hardworking, honest, honorable people from other countries are excluded arbitrarily from citizenship, while lazy and worthless people who are allowed to retain their American citizenship just because they happen to have been born here. That's obviously ridiculous.
And question 10, what is your opinion on military spending?
Military spending is one of the few things that I think government ought to be doing, but that doesn't mean that it should spend willy-nilly, of course. And,
Right.
and it always has to be kept in mind that the military is the world's largest bureaucracy
Mhm.
and thinks like a bureaucracy and acts like a bureaucracy. It's just that because of the military glory, we sometimes sort of forget that that's basically what they are, just a bureaucracy, just as much as the Department of Health and Human Services. So although I think we need a strong military to protect the country and so forth, I don't think that I worry that we tend to sometimes kind of give a blank check or say, well, let the generals decide.
Right.
The reason we have the civilian control over the military is so that the military generals aren't making all these decisions.
Bonus question. Ding, 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 ding. All right, here we go. Should we buy American products?
If they're the best, yes, but not if they're not the best. So it's really fundamentally anti-American to prefer American products only because they're made in the United States, instead of preferring to buy whatever product is the highest quality and lowest price product that you want out there. Our country was built on the proposition that if you work hard and build a better mousetrap and provide better services and so forth, that you can succeed through your hard work and effort. And we ought to cherish that cultural tradition of respecting hard work and quality products. And that means that if the Japanese build a better car, we buy the Japanese car. And it also, what you hear people complain about is they say, well, God, in fact, just today, President Obama complained that there are too many Japanese cars on the roads and not enough American cars on the roads. Well, that's a good thing. What that means is Americans are so rich, we can afford to have the Japanese make our cars for us.
Right.
We don't have to make our cars in this country because we're that rich. That's a good thing. The whole idea of a trade imbalance is a meaningless concept. I have a tremendous trade imbalance with my grocery store. They have never bought a single thing from me. Right? But that's a good thing because they exist in order to provide me with the products that I need, and I'm a happier person because I can go and do my shopping there. If another country is able to provide us with automobiles at low cost that do a good job, we should buy those automobiles from those people and be happier for it and spend our money on other things, go on trips to Disneyland. That's a good thing.
Right on. Rocket Fire! Rocket Fire!
Bam!
Mr.
That's a
Timothy
good one.
Sandefur.
Well done.
Wow. Well done, man. Fantastic.
I think I may have gone over the 60 seconds.
Oh, that's fine. That was a bonus question. I mean, all the other ones you're spot on, man. Under 30 seconds, at least. You have a book, The Right to Earn a Living. What do you mean by the right to earn a living in your book?
Well, the right to earn a living means it really just means your right to use your liberty by building things or making things or providing services to people or painting their houses or singing songs for money or whatever it might be. And the Constitution, you often hear people talk about things like the right to earn a living or the right to privacy or things like they often use the term unenumerated rights. Those rights aren't found in the Constitution. Well, that's not true. In fact, the Constitution says that we all have a right to liberty. It uses that word. No person shall be deprived of liberty without due process of law. And liberty includes your freedom to do what you want to with the things that belong to you as long as you don't harm some other person.
Sure.
And if I choose to start a business, then that's just as much my liberty as another person's decision to, I don't know, play the guitar or something.
Right.
We all have these rights. And so the right to earn a living just means the right to go into business for yourself or to take a job from somebody else, to make $1 billion selling some fancy new device, or to, have a humble little farm that you're just happy selling a few potatoes on weekends. I mean, whatever it might be, your right to earn a living means your right to economic freedom of choice.
Absolutely. And what was the function or purpose of the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution?
Well, now to answer that question, I had to write another book. That was
Nice.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
That was my more recent book, The Conscience of the Constitution.
Right.
And the point of the 14th Amendment, in short, was to make clear that the principles in the Declaration of Independence are part of our Constitution. So the Constitution, as originally written, did not define the word citizen. Which, if you think about it, is really rather shocking. You have a Constitution that doesn't explain what citizens are, even though it uses the word citizen and never explains what that means. Well, what the 14th Amendment was the first time that the Constitution defined what it meant to be a citizen, and it protected the rights of all American citizens against violations from state governments, which the original Constitution had not done. It used to be your freedom of speech was protected only against the federal government, not against the states. So the 14th Amendment protects your rights against interference from the state as well as the federal government.
So we have a thing here in Seattle. There is I don't know if it's I guess I would call it a regulation among government employees here.
A policy.
A policy. Thank you.
Policy.
Where they are not allowed to use the word citizen.
Because it might offend someone.
Because it might offend somebody who's not technically a citizen. So, and we've talked about this several times on the show, as we feel it's ludicrous. What is this definition of citizen that the government's come up with?
Well, the 14th Amendment says that any person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. What that means is if you're born here or naturalized here and you're not subject to some foreign country's jurisdiction, you're not a citizen of some foreign country, then you are just automatically a citizen as a person in the United States. And of course, citizens are distinguished from people who are non-citizens. You cannot have you can't have a political system work that doesn't distinguish between people who are and people who are not citizens. It doesn't mean you don't respect their rights.
Right.
In fact, the 14th Amendment says in there, it's very carefully worded. It says states have to respect the rights of persons within their jurisdiction, which is different from citizens. It means that even non-citizens are protected in their basic human rights. But some people don't, who aren't citizens, don't have the full measure of political rights. They don't have the right to vote for president, for example, because they're not citizens of the United States. And that's how that ought to be.
That's okay. Absolutely.
That's cool. How has government artificially created monopolies and discouraged entrepreneurs? I think you went into this a little bit on our first segment, but...
Well, there are many ways, and this is a very old thing. I mentioned that the right to earn a living reaches back to the 17th century. There was a famous judge named Edward Cook who once said that a lot of the time these lobbyists, he said, are like a man in a rowboat who look one way but row the other. They pretend public benefit but intend private benefit.
Okay.
And what he meant was that very often lobbyists go to the government and they say, oh, you should create some new law, some licensing requirement or whatever, because it protects the general public. When what they really mean is it'll prevent competition against them.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens in a wide variety of ways. The government, for instance, makes it illegal for people to practice certain businesses without having a college degree. For example, in Florida, it's illegal to be an interior designer without having a college degree.
Really?
Which is
crazy.
Insane.
That's ridiculous.
Because you don't need a college degree to do that, and because this is this is one of these jobs that's a great entry-level opportunity for people who didn't have the luxury of going to college. But now the government's going to basically build a wall and say nobody's allowed to cross this wall and practice the trade of interior design without having basically the government's permission. And so that's an example of the kind of monopolies that the government establishes. They pretend that it protects the public, but really it's just designed to protect people who are lucky enough to have licenses.
So interior designer, is it a specified degree like certificate or being a cosmetologist or something like that? Or is it any degree?
It's like that. It's that you have to get a certificate, but in order to qualify to get a certificate, you have to have a college degree. So in the same way that, for instance, I mentioned lawyer licensing, in order to take the bar exam to become a lawyer in almost every state, you have to have first gone to a law school that's accredited by the American Bar Association. So that gives the American Bar Association a virtual monopoly on who is allowed to go into the practice of law. It's kind of like that.
That's crazy. What is the purpose? And you said this, and I thought it was hilarious. But what is the purpose of zoning laws?
Well, zoning laws were originally invented around the 1900s, around the end of the 19th century, in order to exclude racial minorities from white neighborhoods. There was a huge influx of immigrants from Europe, particularly Italy, which during that time, there were more immigrants from Italy than from any other country. And there was, places like New York City developed these neighborhoods like Little Italy that still exist to this day in New York City because of these huge influxes of immigrants, obviously other cities too, Boston, all these other cities. And so white, powerful, elite people in the cities didn't like this influx of these dirty immigrants who didn't speak English and weren't members of the right church. And so they passed these laws in order to create these, to basically segregate the city into zones where different people would live. And they weren't always that explicit about it, although sometimes they were. It wasn't until the 1940s that the Supreme Court said that it was illegal to write a contract forbidding any Jewish person from living in your neighborhood.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy.
And this is a long history in American law. Until the 1940s, no Chinese person could own property in California. And so these laws, the zoning laws, were just one of a variety of laws that were created in order to control society and make sure that we didn't have the wrong people living in the wrong places. Now, today, they're not explicit about this purpose. The idea behind zoning today is supposedly, we don't want to have, a dynamite factory next to a school. Well, okay. But if you look at the zoning map of New York City, for example, it is as haphazard and as pockmarked as anything you could ever. It's not about rational land use planning. It's about political favoritism. It's filled with so many exceptions and exemptions and that are just handed out when the authorities decide to hand them out. There's no rational land use planning there. And of course, who can afford to get political influence? Who can afford to get political favors to get a zoning variance? Typically, it's not poor black people. Typically, it's rich white folks. So these kinds of restrictions on property use still tend to entrench the racial and class divisions in our society.
Was that a progressive thing, the zoning laws?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I figured it was. If it's shitty, it's probably them.
Well, it's a big moneymaker, too. I mean, I know because we're going through it with our property here in Seattle. To apply for a change of use has run you in the neighborhood of a couple $1,000s anyway.
That's
so
right.
It's a money generator.
And again, that's not something that poor members of racial minorities can typically afford to get. And we mentioned blight and eminent domain earlier. The same thing applies there. Eminent domain has been used in the 50s and 60s. It was used for what they called slum clearance, but what came to be known as Negro removal, because it basically what large cities did was bulldoze the poor neighborhoods in order to build shopping centers or nice new government buildings or whatever. But of course, the poor neighborhoods were black, and the new neighborhoods that took their places were either white or they were industrial areas or something. And so all these cities really did was they pushed the poorer people out of the cities.
Wow.
And then they looked around and said, look, there's no more poor people in the city.
Right.
Our program must have worked because there aren't as many poor people in the city. Yeah, because you threw them all out, right?
Wow.
Now they're in New Jersey.
Yeah, or in Los Angeles, where I'm from, Dodger Stadium is a great example of this. Dodger Stadium was constructed in Chavez Ravine, which was a large Mexican community in the city, largely in order to eradicate what the city fathers considered to be a slum area. And to this day, people remember living in Chavez Ravine. It wasn't really that bad a neighborhood by those standards, certainly not as bad as today's standard. And this is an example of how politically influential groups use the system to gain benefits at the expense of the poor, and that means typically the underrepresented people, members of minority groups. And yet, amazingly enough, liberals who claim to speak for the poor advocate in favor of these kinds of government programs because they think they're democratic, even though it's typically the poor and members of minority groups who can't afford to pull the levers of democratic privilege to get those things done in their favor.
What is the danger of executive powers?
Well, all power, as James Madison said, all power lodged in human hands is subject to abuse.
Okay.
So the president is just as much a threat as any other branch of government. Actually, the legislature, Congress, is the most dangerous branch of the government. It has such extremely broad powers; it can do very much what it wants. And but the president is dangerous because his authority is not very clearly specified in the Constitution. So he can detain people and engage in foreign intrigues and all these sorts of things without very much control.
Okay.
I have a question. Here in Seattle, and it's kind of popping up in other cities throughout the country, is the raising of the mandatory minimum wage. Here in Seattle, it's $15 now.
Right.
From a legal standpoint, do you believe that companies are going to be able to challenge this and overturn it?
I would be very surprised. And if they are able to, it will probably be more on a technical ground than on any principled position about economic freedom. Now, to be clear, the minimum wage law is one of the stupidest ideas ever invented, and it harms the poor so dramatically. It's particularly, once again, it's typically poor and members of minority groups who suffer. This is the minimum wage law is the idea that we're going to make poor people better off by making their jobs illegal, which is not rational.
Counterintuitive.
It is not rational to try and improve people's lives by outlawing their jobs. What the minimum wage law says, it's better for you to be unemployed than for you to earn $5 an hour or whatever it might be. And that is just a terrible idea. It ends up harming consumers by raising prices for things they need. And typically that also disproportionately harms the poor because they tend to shop at the places where they pay their workers minimum wage. As opposed to, wealthy people, they shop at Whole Foods. Whole Foods employees aren't earning minimum wage.
Or we call it whole paycheck here.
Yeah. But other people, poor people, they tend to do their shopping at the 7-Eleven or whatever it might be, and those people are making minimum wage. So the prices go up there disproportionately. Also, it means that it's harder for them to get a job. If I am an employer and I'm not allowed to pay people $5 an hour, I'm required to pay them $10 an hour, then I'm only going to hire people who are going to make work, they're going to do work that's worth $10 an hour, which means that if some guy comes to me and says, hey, I had a bad childhood, I don't have much education, I spent some time in jail, but I'm putting my life straight and I'd like to have a job, I'd like to work for you for $5 an hour, I have to say, no, sorry, I can't do it.
Right on.
So this is a terrible idea, and it hurts the poor members of minority groups most of all. But these things get passed all the time, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court has made clear that the government can basically do whatever it wants to in this realm, and there's hardly anything that business owners can do about it except raise their prices or go out of business.
Right on. Give it up for Timothy Sandefur.
Damn. Wow.
Hey, Mr. Sandefur, do you have a website you want to direct our listeners to?
Sure. You can check out Pacific Legal Foundation at pacificlegal.org, and you can find information about my books and my speaking events and things on my personal website, which is sandefur.typepad.com, or just search my name, Timothy Sandefur, in Google, and you'll find it. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook.
Right on. Thank you very much for this great opportunity. You had schooled our asses here at the Johnny Rocket Launchpad.
Yes.
It was really great.
I feel a little bit smarter now.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit.
Kurt's headphones are getting a little big now.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyway, so this is Johnny Rocket here on the Johnny Rocket Launchpad, launching ideas in your direction, a Northwest only rock and roll libertarian radio show. And next up, we got Band of the Week, so stick around.
Way, held off and cages out and strong.